Chapter 9, The Great Conspiracy, Who's in Charge? One day after Jack Ruby died of complications arising from cancer in January 1967, while he was still lying in Chicago's original Weinstein and Sons funeral home, the Soviet government newspaper Izvestia observed that Ruby's suddenly discovered lethal illness was suspicious. It cited reports that Ruby suspected he had been infected with cancer through an injection given in jail. He was removed from the Dallas County Jail to the hospital a month before his death. Several French newspapers took a similar line, and in London, The Sun, an independent pro-Labour Party paper, noticed that Ruby died when many people were questioning whether he was one of a ring of conspirators behind the shooting of President Kennedy. Without waiting for any word from Dallas County Medical Examiner Earl Rose, the official who had tried to bar the removal of Kennedy's body from Parkland, half a dozen overseas publications decided that Ruby's death was mysterious. Americans probably chuckled at these stories after seeing Dr. Rose's autopsy report. Ruby died of a massive blood clot in his lungs. He had advanced cancer of the lungs and 8 small, previously undiscovered brain tumors. There was no sign of foul play. If U.S. readers smiled at the irresponsibility of the European press, they shouldn't have. The Soviet propaganda organ's wild and malicious guess at what happened to Ruby was but a pale imitation of the stories American writers have been feeding both American and European readers for 3 years. The conspiracy-minded American authors, in fact, are far ahead of their Soviet counterparts. Just before Ruby's passing, they had run the count of mysterious deaths surrounding Kennedy's assassination to an ominous total of 18. Ruby was undoubtedly added to their list of witnesses or friends or relatives of witnesses who, in Lane's phrase, have suffered threats or worse since November 22, 1963. To the Warren Report critics and assassination buffs, having any connection with the Kennedy murder case is like entering King Tut's tomb or owning the Hope Diamond. All who do are doomed. The important difference to them is that while Hope's and King Tut's victims were brought down by mystical curses, those connected with the Kennedy case are cut down by conspirators. The authors are totally vague about the nature and purposes of this conspiracy, which must have been going on now for several years, undetected by all but them. But in their books, the mysterious deaths prove there not only was, but still is, a great conspiracy. It is the reductio ad absurdum argument of the Warren Report skeptics, but we will examine it anyway. The high priest of the mysterious deaths cult is a 5'2" Texan named Penn Jones Jr., editor of the weekly Midlothian Mirror and author of the assassination book most likely to succeed with the lunatic fringe, Forgive My Grief. Jones, who first totted up to 18 deaths, admits he cannot prove that all were murders, but he tries valiantly to show that even those certified as natural occurred under clouded circumstances. Lane is more cautious, voicing his suspicions only about 5 of the deaths regarded by Jones as Kennedy-connected. Other publications, notably the magazines Esquire and Ramparts, and several TV programs on which Jones and Lanes have appeared, have treated the coincidental deaths as though they were germane to the assassination and tended to prove the existence of a conspiracy. Lane's and Jones' favorite case involves Warren Reynolds, one of the used car salesmen who saw Oswald running from the Tippit murder scene, and Nancy Jane Mooney, a one-time girlfriend of a man once suspected but never formally accused of shooting Reynolds in the head. It is the kind of cheap story that clutters the police blotters of every major city daily. Chances are it would never have been printed, even in the Dallas paper, if Reynolds had not been a peripheral witness to the Oswald Tippit case, and if Nancy had not claimed before she hanged herself that she was once a stripper at Ruby's Carousel. Reynolds was critically wounded by an intruder at the Reynolds Motor Company on January 23, 1964, one day after he had made a statement to FBI agents about seeing the Tippit gunman. 3 days later, police arrested a rival used car salesman, Darrell Wayne Dago Garner, when Garner, after a few drinks, stood up in Topper's Cafe and said, in effect, that Reynolds got what he deserved. Garner, who got an affidavit from Mrs. Mooney stating that he was with her the night of the shooting, eventually was freed. Then, a few days later, Mrs. Mooney was arrested for fighting with her roommate. While awaiting trial for disturbing the peace, she hanged herself in her jail cell. To Lane, this is all very mysterious. Her affidavit had been filed and the man accused of shooting an important commission's witness had been released. He writes, suddenly deciding that Reynolds was an important witness. While alone in her cell, less than 2 hours after her arrival there, Miss Mooney hanged herself to death, as the Dallas police told it. Lane's phrase, as the Dallas police told it, is the tip-off to all but his dullest readers that there was obviously much more to the case. There were many more details which Lane omitted, but they were not the kind of details on which to build a conspiracy case. For one thing, if Lane had looked at police files, he would have discovered that Garner was released primarily because Reynolds, on recovery, said that Dago was not his assailant. For another thing, Garner passed a lie test in which he denied any knowledge of the shooting. The Mooney affidavit was incidental. As for Mrs. Mooney, a barmaid who had been declared an unfit mother, the details Lane omitted were more sordid but equally unconvincing as evidence of a conspiracy. Mrs. Mooney got into a street fight at 2 a.m. with her roommate, Patsy Moore, over the attentions of a man they both had dated. After the date knocked Nancy down, police picked her up and put her in jail. Then, after 2 hours in her cell in a drunken condition, Mrs. Mooney took off her toreador pants, wrapped one leg over the top of her cell and the other around her neck, and stepped off her bunk. When cut down by a police matron who noted she was wearing polka dot bikini panties and had the word "hoot" tattooed on her bottom, she was dead of asphyxiation. Friends testified she had tried twice before to kill herself, a fact attested to by slash marks on both wrists. No records of the Carousel Club indicated she had ever worked there, nor did any employees remember her. Citing the Reynolds and Moody incidents as evidence of a conspiracy with no more evidence than this, and Lane cites much less, is the most wishful kind of where there's smoke, there's fire thinking. Another favorite case of the conspiracy theorists involves the deaths of 3 men who, according to Jones, died strangely after attending a significant meeting of 6 men in Ruby's apartment shortly after Ruby shot Oswald. Lane, in a footnote, cites Jones as his authority that such a meeting occurred. The number of persons, including thirsty and news-hungry reporters who milled into Ruby's apartment that night at the invitation of his roommate, George Senator, a sudden bibulous celebrity, is arguable. Some say it was astronomical, but in any event, 3 of them are now dead, a fact that Jones and Lane regard as ill-omened. James F. Koth, a reporter for the Dallas Times-Herald, was killed by a karate chop in his apartment, according to Jones. Police say he was strangled, not chopped, in a crime of passion that had no conceivable connection with Kennedy. His alleged assailant was prosecuted for another crime, a hotel robbery, and is now serving a life sentence. Another reporter at that meeting, Bill Hunter of the Long Beach, California Independent, was shot to death in a police station, Jones notes, suggesting that the conspiracy tracked him to California. Hunter, a police buff, was fatally wounded while sitting in the press room of the Long Beach Police Building. He was struck by a fatal bullet from a pistol of a policeman who admitted he was stunting at cops and robbers when the accident occurred. The policeman was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and given a suspended sentence. The third man, Dallas attorney Thomas Howard, who may or may not have been at Ruby's apartment, but who served briefly as his attorney, died of a heart attack, but Jones notes no autopsy was performed. Another death linked to the Kennedy case by Jones is that of Mrs. Earlene Roberts, the plump widow who was Oswald's housekeeper on Beckley Avenue. By the time Mrs. Roberts died in January 1966, she had already told everything she knew about her ex-roomer, who was dead. At 60, she also had heart trouble, ulcers, and cataracts. She would seem an unlikely target for conspirators' vengeance. But there she is on Jones' list with the familiar note, no autopsy was performed. Actually, an autopsy was performed at Parkland. It determined that she died of an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack. Hank Killiam makes Jones' list because his wife Wanda once sold cigarettes at the Carousel. Killiam, a house painter, left town after the assassination, a portentous occurrence to Jones, moved to Pensacola, Florida, and planned to send for his wife. Before he did, he was killed in a street incident in which a plate glass window was shattered and his throat was cut. Since his wallet and diamond ring were missing, police decided he had been robbed, but Jones figured the long arm of the conspiracy had reached out to Florida. William Wally, 51, the cab driver who picked up Oswald near the school book depository and later identified him in a police lineup, died in December 1965. To make this one mysterious was a little difficult, since Wally was killed in a head-on collision with an 83-year-old driver who was driving northbound in a southbound lane. The 83-year-old and unlikely conspirator was also killed, but Jones managed to come up with something. Wally had a 30-year perfect driving record and was the first Dallas cabbie to be killed in the line of duty since 1937. Then there was the strange death of Edward Benavides, 29-year-old brother of Domingo Benavides, who stopped his pickup truck just a few feet from where Oswald shot Tippit. Eddie was shot to death in a Dallas tavern in February 1965. Ramparts magazine, reviewing Jones' list, reported that Eddie was shot with a pistol and that his brother Domingo was probably the intended victim, implying the case was unsolved. Actually, Eddie was blasted with a shotgun, and a 41-year-old drinking companion who confessed the crime served 20 months for the manslaughter. Another victim of the conspiracy was Lee Bowers, the railroad tower man, who observed something out of the ordinary at the top of the grassy knoll. Bowers was killed in August 1966 when his car veered from the highway and hit a bridge abutment 2 miles from Midlothian, Jones' hometown. Jones' suspicions were aroused this time because A, there was no autopsy, and B, Bowers was cremated soon afterwards. The piece de resistance of Jones' potpourri of coincidental, natural, and violent deaths, however, is his listing of Dorothy Kilgallen, the Hearst columnist who died of acute barbiturate and alcohol intoxication in her New York home in November 1965. What's the connection? Miss Kilgallen, Jones remembered, was once allowed an interview with Jack Ruby in his jail cell. This one was a little far-fetched even for Ramparts, which admitted it knew of no serious person who really believes that the death of Dorothy Kilgallen, the gossip columnist, was related to the Kennedy assassination. But then Ramparts couldn't resist speculating a little anyway. Was it suicide? Accident? Murder? Dr. Luke, a New York City medical examiner, said there was no way of determining that. Actually, if Jones has kept an accurate count of what he calls Kennedy-related deaths, counting newsmen, husbands, wives, brothers, and friends of witnesses as related, what he has proved is that the Kennedy case has given added longevity to many who were touched by it. If, by Jones' reckoning, 1,000 adult persons were related to the Kennedy case, the commission heard 552 witnesses and only 18 have died since, then many others are defying the actuarial tables and cheating death. According to the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, which keeps track of such things, in a group of 1,000 persons 20 years of age and older in the U.S. population at large, a total of 43, more than twice Jones' figure, should have died in the 3-year period following Kennedy's death. Neither Jones, nor Lane, nor Ramparts has explained why the conspirators have picked away at fringe witnesses, killing them off with such weapons as cancer, heart attacks, alcohol, and barbiturates, while sparing key witnesses such as Howard Brennan, who saw Oswald shoot Kennedy, William Scoggin and Helen Markham, who saw him shoot Tippit, or surviving members of the Oswald, Ruby, and Tippit families. To remedy this deficiency, Lane has a theory that some key witnesses, or relatives of key witnesses anyway, have been harassed by the police. As an example, in succinct dragnet fashion, he recounts a case involving his old adversary, Helen Markham. On June 27, 1964, Helen Markham was visited by independent interviewers. She declined to talk to them, but her son, William Markham, consented to an interview. He later told the FBI that he had informed these interviewers that his mother had lied on many occasions, even to members of her immediate family. 3 days later, the Dallas police arrested another of Mrs. Markham's sons. He was injured while trying to escape from the police at the time, the commission explained. Repeating the official police statement, the report added that he fell from a window to a concrete driveway about 20 feet below. As Lane describes this visitation on the Markham family, it would appear to the reader that the police came and arrested a Markham boy, not the one who talked to the FBI, but another one, because one of them had described his mother, a key witness before the commission, as a liar. It would further appear from Lane's staccato account that the police injured the youth, perhaps by throwing him out of the window, and then gave the commission the old story that he was injured while trying to escape, and the commission bought it. If true, this would be a startling bit of evidence that the Dallas police, perhaps as part of a conspiracy, were intimidating witnesses or sons of witnesses. The single document on which Lane bases his provocative paragraph tells an entirely different story, however. The document headed Mark Lane is a report by the Dallas office of the FBI dated July 31st, 1964, and based on interviews with Mrs. Markham and her son. It reveals that the independent interviewers who called on Mrs. Markham were Mrs. Marguerite Oswald and 2 men with cameras and a tape recorder, one of whom represented himself as an attorney. Mrs. Markham, who had talked to Lane only by phone in their celebrated bushy-haired interview, could not then have identified Lane. As Mrs. Markham refused to talk to them, her son William, who was in Norfolk, Virginia at the time of the Tippit murder, followed them, got in their car, and talked to them. Her other son, James, was not at home and had no knowledge of their visit. Several days later, police came to the home to arrest James on a charge of burglarizing a concession stand at the Marcellus Zoo, an offense not exactly connected with the Kennedy Tippit case. When the police arrived, James asked and got permission to go to the bathroom before leaving. While in the bathroom, attempting to escape, he opened the window and jumped 24 feet to a concrete driveway below. He was treated at Parkland, then lodged in the county jail. His mother voluntarily gave the police several cartons of cigarettes, 2 radios, an electric shaver, and other articles she believed James had stolen, according to the report. This is but one example of how Lane, bent on proving the police were involved in a conspiracy, distorts the facts in an FBI report, a report, in this case, in which he may have been involved. But Lane's cry of conspiracy is not limited to police and participants in the Kennedy, Oswald, Tippit, Ruby drama. Lane tries to make clear to his readers that the whole establishment, including the press, was involved. For instance, in the chapter headed The Gauze Curtain, in which he transforms Kennedy's 2 exit wounds into entrance wounds, he suggests that the press joined with unnamed federal authorities and presumably the doctors at Parkland and Bethesda to mislead the public about the nature of Kennedy's wounds. As a reporter who worked on that story where newsmen were competing desperately for exclusive bits of information, I can testify this is an absurd notion. It should be sufficient to point out that Life magazine, which Lane implicates in his imagined plot, has since called for a new investigation of the assassination. It is difficult to imagine Life calling for a scrupulously objective probe of a catastrophe in which it supposedly played a conspiratorial role. Nonetheless, we will look at Lane's case against the press. His implied thesis is that the American press, after the hospital news conference by Dr. Perry's and Clark, first reported the truth about Kennedy's wounds, then, as the truth became untenable, changed its story. The truth, as Lane sees it, is that Kennedy suffered an entrance wound in his throat. This, he reasons, became untenable to the press after the federal government adopted a sort of party line, decreeing that both Kennedy's wounds were inflicted from the rear. Then, as Lane sees it, the press changed its story. To bolster this preposterous argument, Lane quotes selectively from stories in Life, the New York Times, and other papers published in the days immediately following the assassination. In those first hectic hours, he notes ominously, the press, which knew only of the 2 wounds described by Doctors Perry and Clark, generally ran with the theory that the throat wound was one of entry. The New York Times said it had the appearance of an entrance wound. Then Lane observes, continuing to build his case, Life came up with a second official version of Dallas in which it dismissed the recurring guess that there was a second sniper somewhere else. The quote is from Life, and concluded that Kennedy had turned and was facing the schoolbook depository when hit in the throat. Since this version was not borne out by the Zapruder film, which showed Kennedy facing forward when hit, another theory that the throat entrance wound was really an exit wound was selected according to Lane's dark view of history. The truth is, of course, as any newspaper reader will remember, that the U.S. press floundered for several weeks in an effort to explain Kennedy's wounds, not because it had followed any official line, but because there was no official line. While the Navy clamped a lid of secrecy on the report of the Bethesda autopsy team, which had discovered 2 entrance wounds and classified both wounds observed at Dallas as exit wounds, and while the Secret Service refused to discuss the bullet hole in the windshield of the president's car, which turned out to be a mere fracture on the inside, the American press had nothing to go on but the Zapruder film, but the seemingly contradictory first-day statements of the Parkland doctors. The information logjam was finally broken, not with the issuance of an official word from the government, as Lane asserts, but by a Washington Post reporter who defied government secrecy and dug out of the government the story of what the autopsy team had found. On December 18, 1963, Nate Hazeltine, the Post's medical expert, printed the first report on the conclusions the Bethesda pathologist had reached on November 23, 1963. Though he reported accurately that the president was shot twice, both times from the rear, he erred in stating that one bullet was found deep in his shoulder and that a fragment had caused the exit wound in the throat. At that time, Lane's suspicions notwithstanding, the American press was conspiring only to find out what really happened at Dallas. Most U.S. newspapers subsequently accepted, on the basis of massive evidence adduced, the conclusion of the Warren Commission that President Kennedy was first struck by a bullet which entered at the back of his neck and exited through the lower front portion of his neck. It is a tribute to the open-mindedness of the American press that although Lane questioned its integrity in his rush to judgment, the press still continues to devote whole columns to his writings and speeches. In fact, If it were not for the conspiratorial press, few of his readers would be aware of his bizarre tale of conspiracy and intrigue. Another pet theory of Weisberg and the conspiracy advocates is that the Warren Commission, which failed to print frames 208 through 211 of the Zapruder film in volume 18 of its hearings, destroyed or suppressed these frames because they showed another bullet hitting Kennedy, perhaps from another direction. President Kennedy clutches his throat at frame 225. This missing frame, or early hit theory, one of 6 spawned by the invaluable Zapruder film, is a favorite on the West Coast. The fact that it implies the Chief Justice of the United States was involved in a conspiracy with assassins and murderers seems almost incidental to its eager supporters. As evidence of the fraud, they cite the fact that the next frame, 212, bears evidence of a film splice. And why are these most crucial frames, 208 through 211, omitted from the one place where they serve the greatest value, asks Weisberg, or is the question self-answering? After 2 years during which there was no explanation from the no longer existent commission, a former assistant counsel explained that the printing of the hearings was merely a housekeeping function. The answer finally came in January 1967. To the conspiracy buffs, it must have been a disappointment. Life, which bought the film from Zapruder and furnished prints to the commission, admitted that, in handling the film of the Kennedy assassination taken by Abraham Zapruder in Dallas, we accidentally damaged not 4 but 6 frames of the original, frames 207 through 212. Before that happened, however, and before Life came into possession of the original print, Zapruder had ordered 3 color copies made by a Dallas laboratory, 2 for federal agents and 1 for Life. After that, Life explained, when the Warren Commission asked for color blow-ups from the original film, Life supplied all but the missing frames. The commission housekeepers, instead of reproducing the missing frames from one of the 3 existing copies, simply printed without explanation what they had on the damaged original. Thus, said Life, there never have been any missing frames, and to prove it, they released for publication from their copy frames 207 through 212. The so-called missing frames showed nothing but a smiling Kennedy waving at the crowd before he was shot. Another conspiracy theory, rooted in human error rather than evil design, hit the cutting room floor. Since the 65 unpublished photographs and x-rays from President Kennedy's autopsy had been turned over to the National Archives by the Kennedy family 2 months earlier, this left the conspiracy mythmakers without a single missing frame of film on which to predicate new plots. Under terms laid down by Senator Robert F. Kennedy, the autopsy films, which should never have left the custody of the government, will be accessible only to federal investigating agencies for 5 years, and after that, with restrictions, to serious, recognized experts. But before they were locked up, 2 of the 3 doctors who had performed the Kennedy autopsy looked at them. Captain James J. Humes, who had since made news by performing the biopsy on President Johnson's throat polyp, and Dr. J. Thornton Boswell, now a civilian, said the photographs, which they had not seen before, and x-rays reconfirmed their autopsy findings. The conspiracy theorists, of course, will never be satisfied. Like religious fanatics who insist the world is flat, they will cling to their conflicting theories into the next life. Each time I read a new theory, and a brand new one involving 3 gunmen was published by Ramparts in January 1967, I am reminded of a talk I had with a Secret Service agent soon after the first of the books charging conspiracy appeared. If this is a conspiracy, he said, it's really a big one. It's got to include the Dallas Police Force, the Secret Service, the FBI, all those doctors at Parkland, all those doctors at Bethesda, the entire Warren Commission, the Warren Commission staff, the Justice Department, and finally the Attorney General, or it just won't work. The Attorney General at that time was Robert F. Kennedy. Somehow, after that, I could never take conspiracy theories very seriously.